So this is the Centipede machine from Arcade1Up. Every game on this machine was designed to use the rollerball and anywhere between 1 and 3 buttons. We're going to start off with Centipede, obviously. That is the marquee title here. Was released in 1981, and Centipede was created by Ed Logg and Donna Bailey. Ed Logg also had a hand in the creation of Asteroids, Millipede, and Gauntlet, so he was there for some of the biggest hits of the early arcades. And Donna Bailey was one of the pioneering women programmers at Atari. So the idea between the two of them was to come up with a gender-neutral game that could attract more female players, and they really succeeded with this one. Centipede was one of the biggest hits of the late 70s, early 80s arcade time frame, and it's partially because it's one of the ones that's really easy to learn but difficult to master. It's that type of game. It was ported onto a ton of home consoles and computers in the 80s, and it was really fun to play the Atari versions with the trackball controller that was sold separately. In playing the game, you have to destroy the entire Centipede to clear a level and move on. Hitting the head is worth more than hitting the individual body segments, but obviously that's harder said than done. The Arcade1Up cabinet here sports the same gorgeous artwork as the arcade, and that's what really caught my eye when I saw it at E3 this past year. You can see it on the side of the cabinet here. Also, the comparison shots between the arcade and the home versions right here, you can see that the control deck is nearly identical, although the home version actually has the 2 extra buttons that are used for missile command. Otherwise, it would be the same control deck. The rollerball in this machine is actually really smooth, and it works perfectly, and you can see every time I get frustrated, I spin that thing like I always did in the arcades, like I always did with the one for the Atari at home. It's just what you do when you're holding on to that thing. This was another one of my favorite games when I was younger, and I'm really happy with the translation of it here. The other nice thing is that this one does retain your high scores when the cabinet is turned off, so it's nice to have that. So in my excitement to jump right into Centipede here, I forgot to kind of tell you how to get through these games, get around the menu system. You hold down that player 1 button when you're in a game, hold it down for about 5 seconds, and that'll kick you out to the main menu. You move around with the rollerball, and you're going to hit that A button there, which is that one I just hit, the red button with kind of the starburst around it. It comes with a sticker, but I took that sticker off. It's a clear sticker with just the letter A on it. I am a stickler for arcade games, essentially, and the control deck looking like it did, so I really didn't want that there, but you can leave it there, you can take it off. It's pretty easy to remember which button it is, and if you're not sure, just hit them all until one of them works. I mean, it's not that complicated. There's only 3 buttons on the machine. So this obviously is Millipede. This came out a year after Centipede became a huge hit. It came to the arcades in 1982. This was created by Ed Logg and Franz Lanziger. And as a direct sequel to Millipede, it took everything Centipede had to offer, and it really upped the ante. You had more enemy bugs on the screen, and you had new gameplay elements that were added. There's DDT bombs up there, which will destroy everything around them in a cloud of poisonous smoke when you hit them. And you can have, I think it's up to 4 or 5 on screen at once. And, as you destroy them and the screen moves down the level each time, more new ones will come in to kind of replace the ones that you've hit. And the entire screen does move down a row on completion of each level, and depending on enemies that you hit and things like that. Some of the enemies, the different enemies that are here now, some will add mushrooms, some will change them into indestructible flowers. Some will slow everything down on the screen when they're hit. Some will actually move the screen up a level when they're hit. and all different kinds of things. And as you can see, the bottom of the screen, the bottom area that you can actually move within is highlighted there. This also had the starting score that you could start at, which is slightly different than some of the other arcade games at the time. It puts you at a higher level, and it's one of those skill things that Atari did with Major Havoc, was it? No, Tempest. I'm sorry, Tempest. That they did with Tempest, which I mentioned in the other video, the video for the Asteroids machine, if you want to check that one out. This was one that I didn't really play nearly as much as Centipede, because to me it cluttered things up by adding too much. It kind of took away from the pure, clean gameplay of Centipede. It's definitely more challenging, and it is a lot of fun. I do actually enjoy it. I like not having to put quarters into it all the time. This is actually a really fantastic version of it. I did play it at the arcade nearby, and then came home and played it, and it's the same game. I mean, it's using the same code and everything. So, like all the arcade games here, it feels exactly the same when you play it. It's got the same attract mode and everything. It's pretty awesome. And like Centipede, this does retain the high scores when it gets turned off, when the machine gets turned off. Not when it gets unplugged, just when you hit the off switch there. So that's pretty sweet. So next up, we're going to move into one of my favorite arcade games, Crystal Castles. This was released in 1983. It features isometric levels, which are the three-quarter top-down kind of look that gives the game a 3D feeling like Zaxxon or Congo Bongo. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, what and what? Just go look them up. They're pretty cool games in their own right. So this one, you're Bentley Bear, and you're moving around these little castle areas and trying to collect all the gems and avoid all the bad guys. And when you do, then you move on to the next one. And there's a whole bunch of different bad guys in all these different screens, which make it really, really difficult as you go deeper into the game. So this... there's one minor sticking point that kind of comes here with this game and Missile Command, and it's that since Centipede is the marquee title, the screen in the cabinet is vertical, which is how Centipede and Millipede were played. Crystal Castles and Missile Command, however, were played on a horizontal screen, so the play fields appear much smaller here. You can see there's black space at the top and bottom of the screen, and it's like this for this and Missile Command. So unfortunately, we're not getting the full screen experience. I did play this in the arcade recently, and it's different. It just makes a big difference in terms of the screen size, the presentation. But you know, I'm a little disappointed in not having it really arcade authentic there, but just having any version of Crystal Castles that is the arcade version that I can play at home, it's pretty fantastic. I do have to apologize for the video here. It's a little washed out. I didn't focus on the actual screen, and the Street Fighter screen next to it I see is kind of messing things up every now and then with the camera. One other minor downer here is that the game does not retain the high scores when the machine is turned off. And with this one, it's kind of more important than the others, because that first castle that you come to, the very first castle in the game, the person with the high score, their initials are right there built into the castle. So it's different, depending on who's got the high score, which is kind of cool. Works great here until you turn off the machine, and then you're basically done. Minor quibbles aside, though, it's still a blast to play and just as hard as it always was, but it's absolutely one of my favorite games from the arcades. And you can see right here, I got the high score, and you will see when I start up the second game, my initials are now part of the castle, which I always loved about this game. It's really cool. You've got a number of different enemies that are, kind of difficult to deal with and everything, and just getting through it all is a challenge. Other than the difference being, the horizontal versus vertical screen, it's an amazing port. It's crazy having Crystal Castles to play at home. I keep saying that about all these games. It just blows my mind thinking that I now have all these games available to me to play at home in an authentic arcade setting, essentially, with the actual controls that were used in the arcade. So it makes a huge difference, and the smoothness of this rollerball just helps immensely, because this was a tough game to play with this control scheme. It just always was. And again, I apologize for the video. It looks so much better than this video shows off, unfortunately. Maybe I'll do a live stream of it and get a better video angle of it so that you can actually see it better and see all these games a little bit better. But let's move on next to Missile Command. So, as with all these machines, all these games, you hold down that player 1 button to get back to the menu, and we move into Missile Command. Dave Thurer, who went on to develop Tempest and iRobot, created Missile Command, which was released in 1980. Not only was this hugely popular in the arcades, but it was also a home console hit, with several really good ports on the Atari machines. This game is the entire reason that there are 3 buttons on the machine. It's the only game that uses all 3 of them. Each one of them corresponds with one of your missile silos, and you really have to use them all wisely if you're going to survive. And the levels just get progressively harder as you go. Smart bombs are added, and those need to be hit precisely to be destroyed. It just gets tougher and tougher, but man, it's a good game. An interesting side note, actually, is that during development of the game, Thurer actually had nightmares about the local cities in California being destroyed by nuclear bombs, and he had them for years afterwards. It's kind of hard for later generations to understand, but at the time, we had all kind of grown up with the very real threat of nuclear war. All through my lifetime, up until the Berlin Wall fell in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. So, in a twisted way, that may have actually had something to do with the popularity of this game. You're essentially trying to stave off nuclear annihilation of your cities here. It's a really fun game, though. It's fantastic. This one also, unfortunately, does not retain your high scores. It always resets to that 7,500 when you turn the machine off. So, I mean, overall, this Centipede Cabinet has a really fantastic lineup with 2 of the biggest games of that late 70s, early 80s arcade era in Centipede and Missile Command. The only real negative here is that Crystal Castles and Missile Command suffer just a little bit in the presentation due to the vertical monitor in the machine and the fact that those 2 games really use a horizontal monitor. I certainly wouldn't say it's enough to pass on this one. It's a great cabinet overall with a really simple control scheme that truly lets the game shine. And it just works out so well. Not having to put quarters in is that perfect bonus. At $2.99 for these 4 games, it's a steal. I mean, these are 4 fantastic games. You can see that damn smart bomb right around me and take out my city. So yeah, out of weapons, out of options, basically done at that point. So that's the Centipede cabinet, and I hope you enjoy it. Please let us know in the comments. And now, your moment of zen.
Wait, there's still more. Do yours, Daddy.
I'll do mine in a second. And watch what you're doing there. You were doing good. You did really good with your first player. Don't let him hit you. Oh!